So I was adopted as an infant at 4 weeks old, and my two older sisters and I always grew up knowing we were adopted. I was the youngest and only boy of a Jewish mother, and I can assure you that I longed for absolutely nothing. And my sisters will attest to that fact, and they use every opportunity to rub it in my face, even all these years later. So, they always sort of had this feeling, they said they had like this hole, that I just never felt, and I never really understood what they were talking about. The boys up the street, my friends growing up, the Waller boys, there were 4 of them, they all looked exactly alike, and they all looked exactly like their dad. And when you're adopted, you really don't know who you look like, and you have no idea where you come from. My mother used to always brag about her Danish genes. In fact, she still does. She's 90 years old, and she still mows the lawn. And she's in great shape, and people meet her, and they're like, "Oh my God, you're amazing!" And she's like, "It's my Danish genes," and it's great. But for me, I'm just sitting there all these years, sort of, you nod politely and you smile, but with this sort of vague understanding that her bragging rights never transferred to me, right? So when I was in my 30s, I went to the Holocaust Museum. And when you come to the end of the tour, there's this big giant room called the Hall of Remembrance. And it's this big octagonal room where all the names of concentration camps are etched into the walls. And there's little tables with candles burning. And I got to the door, sort of the entrance, and there were a couple steps going down, and I stood there, and I was completely frozen, and I couldn't move. And I was looking, and I had no idea where to light a candle. I sort of always knew that I was kind of Jewish, but I realized I didn't know my stories, and I realized for the first time, like front and center, that I had no idea where I came from. And that, in fact, I did not have Danish genes, after all. And so when I was 40, I decided to start searching. And when you're adopted, adoptees like me are not entitled to get your birth parents' names. We're not allowed to get our original birth certificates. And so, but what you are allowed to get is what they call non-identifying information. So you send $250 off to the agency through which you're adopted, and they transcribe everything that was in the files from that time, from the time of your birth, and they write it down, except they omit, any names or obviously any identifying information. So I received 4 typewritten pages of information, which was actually a lot. I mean, one of my sisters got like 2 paragraphs. And in this information, what I discovered was my mother, my birth mother, was 38 years old when I was born, and she carried me to full term. She was married, but not to my birth father. And she had 2 children, a 13-year-old boy and a 10-year-old girl. And she was in fact Jewish, so I was like, okay, I'm right, I'm Jewish. It was just like a feeling I had, I guess. It's part of being in the tribe. So she was Jewish, and anyway, so I kept reading, and I discovered that my birth father also was 49 years old when I was born, and he too was married, but not to my mother, and right, and he had a young daughter. But what was interesting about him was that he had just come to this country a few years earlier from Egypt after the last revolution back in the 50s. And I thought, Egypt? Like in a million years, I would never have thought Egypt. And, I'm sitting there thinking, and they met, the information said they had worked together, and he had been a friend of the family. And I'm thinking, an Egyptian and a Jew, no wonder I'm fucking crazy, right? And so, I had to know more. So I decided that I needed to keep searching. So I went on, and, for 10 years, I tried searching on my own, but really to no avail. I'm one of these people, like, I'll Google something 3 times, and if it doesn't, get handed to me on a silver platter, I just turn on the TV. And so, there was lots of fits and starts, and But 10 years later, I came across an investigator, and she specializes in adoption specifically. She's found thousands of people. She's amazing. And so I sent her off my non-identifying information, and she said, I'll do my best. I'll look. We'll see what we can find, what have you. So a few weeks went by, and I was crossing the street near my apartment, and the phone rang, and I answered it, and it was her. And she said, I found them. And I stood there frozen in the middle of the street, and I couldn't move, and I couldn't believe it. She had found my birth mother's family. She found my birth mother's identity. And my birth mother had died 4 years earlier from Lou Gehrig's disease. But she was able to find her children, my half-siblings. And so we immediately started emailing, and there was lots of excitement at first, and it was kind of cool, and it was really kind of creepy. It was everything, right? It was happy, sad, big, small, it was everything. And so we started emailing, and my new sister, Andrea, said, I think I know who your birth father is. And she sent me a name because she remembered. She was 10 years old, and she remembered he had been a friend of the family. So she remembered this name. I sent it to the investigator, and within 10 minutes, she had the whole story. And she sent me, so he had died also a long time ago, 2 years after I was born at the age of 51, of a massive heart attack. I'm 51. And I was like, holy shit, right? And, so health information, right? So there's some reasons here. Their names were Thelma and Anwar. And in fact, his name was Muhammad Anwar. And they met working together at a restaurant in that little strip of shops across the street from what is now the Woodley Park Metro Station. I've lived within walking distance of the Woodley Park Metro Station off and on for over 20 years. It was really an amazing thing to understand. About 4 weeks later, I actually got to meet Andrea and Larry in person. We met at a small restaurant north of Baltimore, and I walked in, and we immediately recognized each other because we actually look alike, right? How about that? And they were the first people I've ever met who I'm genetically related to, and it was really wild. And we sat down, and Andrea leaned across the table, and she said, I remember when Mom came home from the hospital and told me the baby Ira had died. And I thought, Ira? Like, holy shit, all of a sudden Daniel was a really great name, I can tell you that every mother in the world can tell me that it's not possible to give birth and forget, but I understood it intellectually, but I never really believed it for me. And when Andrea leaned in and told me that I was named, everything inside me started shifting around, and I came to know that I was never forgotten. Thank you.